Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into the fascinating world of Greek mythology. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. In the beginning, there was no Olympus, no earth, no sea, no sky. There was only chaos. And chaos was not the kind of chaos modern tongues describe. Disorder, confusion, frenzy. It was older than language itself. Chaos was a yawning void, a gaping nothingness without form or direction. It was not evil, nor good, nor even neutral. It simply was. From that ancient nothing came the first stirrings of existence. Gaia, the earth, vast and unshaking. Tartarus, the abyss beneath the earth, dark and dreadful. And Eros, the force of love and desire, the binding agent of all future creation. These were not gods as we think of them, not yet, but elemental truths given form. Then came Nyx, the night, clothed in a shadow so thick even chaos recoiled. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who would dwell beside her in that early silence. From the union of night and darkness came Ether, the pure upper air breathed by the gods, and Hemera, the day, who from the beginning was fated to chase her mother endlessly across the sky. Thus, the cycle of night and day was born not through science but through myth, through a family of strange invisible titans who lit and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia, the earth herself, did not lie idle. She was patient and fertile, and from her own body she brought forth Uranus, the sky, vast and star-strewn. He was both her son and her consort, and when he arched over her, stretching across the heavens, the world found its first shape, a domed sky above a broad and endless plain. Gaia also birthed the mountains, tall and wild, and Pontus, the sea, who surged with a will of his own before ships or sea monsters ever touched his waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pair, and their union brought forth the Titans, the first generation of powerful beings who would rule the cosmos long before Zeus and his kin rose to power. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each vast and elemental in their own right. Oceanus, the encircling river, Hyperion, the lord of light, Coeus, the inquirer, Creus, the constellation bearer, Iapetus, the ancestor of men, and Cronus, youngest and most cunning. Among the daughters, Theia, shining mother of the sun and moon, Rhea, future mother of gods, Themis, embodiment of divine law, Mnemosyne, the memory of all things, Phoebe, the radiant one, and Tethys, the nourishing sea. But Gaia's womb was not finished with them. She bore monstrous children as well, beings of strength and dread. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, each with a single eye burning like a forge in the center of their brow. They were the smiths of lightning, strong and simple, and they feared no god nor giant. Then came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, each of them enormous and terrible to behold, with 50 heads and 100 arms each, capable of stirring the very foundations of the world when enraged. Uranus, though lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. Ashamed and frightened by their grotesque strength, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, the depths of earth itself, and sealed them there, hidden away beneath layers of rock and grief. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. The earth, once proud and nurturing, now suffered with every breath. It was in this pain that she began to scheme. But that is a story for another day. For now, remember this. In the oldest age, before law or justice, before sword or plough, the world was made not with hands, but with force and union and grief. Chaos birthed the first forms, but it was Gaia, the great mother, who gave them ground to stand upon. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the first great marriage of the cosmos. It was not a marriage of altars or witnesses, but of necessity and nature. The sky stretched over the earth, holding her tightly, pressing her beneath his star-strewn body night after night. From their joining came the Titans and other mighty offspring, but also a deep and growing sorrow. For Uranus, though proud and vast, was a jealous and fearful father. He saw in the monstrous children Gaia bore not strength, but a threat to his dominion. He looked upon the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants with revulsion, not wonder, and with swift, cruel judgment, he thrust them back into Gaia's womb, deep into the belly of the earth, where no light reached and no voice could echo. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. It was not only the agony of bearing them within her again, but the betrayal of her consort, of Sky, who should have cherished their children as she did. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing down the heavens to meet the earth, blind to her pain and deaf to her grief. She could endure no longer. And so, from her own flesh, she fashioned a weapon, not of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been dreamed, but a great sickle of unyielding flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. Then she went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among her children, and laid bare her suffering. "Your father has wronged me," she said. "He has caged your brothers. He has silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will aid me?" One by one they turned away, fearful of their father's might. Only Cronus, the youngest, the shrewdest, the one with watchful eyes and a patient heart, stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." So Gaia set the trap. She waited for Uranus to descend, as he always did, laying himself across her in the dark. And from the shadows, Cronus sprang. With a steady hand and no hesitation, he brought the sickle down upon his father. The sky shook with Uranus's cry as the blade bit deep, severing the source of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied flesh into the sea, and from the crimson foam that rose upon the waves, something new was born. A figure of impossible beauty, terrible and irresistible in equal measure. From that white froth came Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, who would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, radiant and serene, untouched by the violence of her origin. But Gaia's vengeance did not end with blood. From the droplets that fell upon the earth sprang other beings, the Furies, cloaked in shadow and vengeance, who would haunt oathbreakers and kinslayers until the end of days. The giants, who in time would rise up against the gods themselves, and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of the wild and the old ways. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the heavens, leaving the world to his children. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse, one that would ring through time like a bell. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall he be overthrown by his own. It was not a prophecy he invented, but a truth Gaia had already whispered, and Cronus heard it well. He took the sky's throne and wrapped himself in power, but from the moment he grasped it, he began to fear what his father had warned. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos, and began the age of the Titans. Yet already, in the womb of time, the next storm was stirring. With Uranus cast down and the sky no longer pressed so tightly upon the earth, the world breathed anew. The Titans, freed from their father's yoke, now stood tall beneath the heavens, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning among them, claimed dominion over all. He was not a god of chaos or cruelty, as his father had been in the end, but he ruled with a cautious and suspicious heart. The sickle he had used to bring down Uranus remained hidden, buried in the earth or cast into the sea, its blade remembered but unseen, like a secret sin. Cronus had delivered his mother from torment and his siblings from imprisonment, yet from the very moment he sat the throne of the cosmos, his mind was troubled by the prophecy that had driven him to rebellion. The words of his dying father echoed through him like a second heartbeat, that he, too, would be cast down by his own child. So Cronus took a wife, as kings must. He chose Rhea, his sister, a titaness of gentle strength and deep wisdom, though her name would one day be spoken in the same breath as pain. Together, they ruled through a time that later poets would remember as a golden age, a time when mortals, newly created, lived in peace, free from suffering, untouched by winter or war, and the fruits of the earth ripened without need for toil. It was an age before kings had armies, before men built walls or worshipped temples, when justice moved unseen among humankind and no one locked their doors. But such peace, as the world has always known, does not last. In time, Rhea began to bear children, and as each was born, Cronus remembered his father's curse. He did not hesitate. The moment Rhea placed each newborn in his arms, first Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he opened wide his jaws and swallowed them whole. Not a trace was left, not a cry, not a cradle, only the knowledge that they were gone, hidden within their father's belly like seeds in winter soil. He told Rhea it was necessary, that he would not suffer the same fate as Uranus, that the throne must be protected. Rhea, though proud and strong, was powerless against him. She wept, but her tears changed nothing. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times she lost her children to the hunger of her husband's fear. But the 6th time she resolved to act. When she felt the child stir in her womb, she did not go to Cronus. She fled instead to the island of Crete, where the mountains met the sky and deep caves opened beneath the earth. There, hidden among shepherds and nymphs, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. And from the moment of his birth, Rhea knew he was different. His cry shook the trees. His eyes opened before his first breath. And when he grasped her finger, he held it with the strength of fate itself. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and presented it to him with trembling hands. He swallowed it greedily, thinking the danger had passed. But beneath Mount Ida, the infant Zeus was nursed in secret. He was guarded by the Curetes, warriors who danced and clashed their shields to drown out the sound of his cries, and fed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk gave him strength beyond measure. And as Zeus grew, so did the storm that would one day break the world. Yet for now, the age of Cronus held. The sky was high, the earth was green, and the Titans ruled from their thrones, oblivious to the gathering wind. But deep within Cronus, 5 children stirred in the dark, and far to the west, a child born in secrecy watched the stars and waited. In the hidden folds of Mount Ida, where the air was thin and the wind whispered ancient names through stone and pine, Zeus grew to manhood. Raised in secret, far from his father's gaze, he learned of the world not through books or scrolls, but from the silence of the high peaks, the rustling of leaves, and the cautious stories murmured by his guardians in firelight. He drank the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, who had nourished him from birth, and from her broken horn, torn by accident or omen, was born the cornucopia, symbol of endless bounty. When Amalthea died, Zeus hung her hide among the stars in her honor, and her memory became part of the sky he would one day command. But he was not born to stargazing or solitude. The blood in his veins was thick with prophecy, and his bones carried the weight of rebellion. As he came of age, Gaia herself began to stir. She remembered the betrayal of Cronus, the pain of her imprisoned sons, the 100-handed ones, and the Cyclopes buried deep in Tartarus. Her vengeance had not ended with Uranus. It had only been delayed. With words as old as stone, she whispered truth into Zeus's dreams, and in his waking hours, she guided his steps. First, she led him to Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, whose counsel was shrewd and whose loyalty leaned toward the future. With Metis's aid, Zeus fashioned a plan. To strike against Cronus, a king of Titans and time, would require more than strength. It would demand cunning. Zeus returned in disguise to the house of his father, and there, with Metis's craft, he offered Cronus a potion laced in wine, bittersweet and thick as honey. The drink stirred the old Titan's gut, and at last, with a shudder and a groan, Cronus vomited forth the children he had swallowed long ago. They came not as infants, but full-grown and gleaming, clad in the strength of gods, reborn into a world already poised for war. First Hestia, hearth and flame, then Demeter, goddess of the grain, then regal Hera, proud and sharp-eyed, then Hades, lord of the dead, and at last Poseidon, master of the deep. The 6 siblings stood together, for the first time as one, and looked to the throne that had cast them into darkness. They would not forget. But Cronus was not without allies. The Titans rallied to him, his brothers and sisters gathering atop Mount Othrys, the old seat of power in the south. Oceanus remained apart, too old or too wise for blood feuds, but the others, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, took up arms. So began the war the poets called Titanomachy, the clash of Titans and Olympians, a war that tore across the heavens and split the earth to its core. For 10 years the battle raged without end. The sky darkened with storm and smoke. Thunder and fire echoed across the mountains, and the world below, still young and silent, watched in dread as its masters fought for the right to rule. The Titans held Othrys, tall and time-worn, while Zeus and his kin made their stand upon Mount Olympus, a peak still unscarred by war. The battles were terrible and unrelenting. Lightning tore open the skies, and tidal waves swallowed islands whole. Volcanoes bled fire, and winds howled like wolves. At times the war seemed endless, neither side able to land the final blow. But Gaia, ever watchful, knew that the balance could not tip without what had been long buried. She counselled Zeus once more. If he were to win, he must descend into Tartarus and free his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, whom Cronus had kept locked in chains out of fear. With his siblings beside him, Zeus broke the gates of the underworld and released the imprisoned powers. The Cyclopes, grateful and eager, gifted Zeus his greatest weapons, the thunderbolt, the symbol of sky and storm. To Poseidon, they gave the trident with which he would command the seas, and to Hades, a helm of darkness that would make him unseen. The Hecatonchires, giants with 100 hands, joined the fight at last, hurling mountains like stones and battering the Titans with the fury of ancient things unbound. With these allies, the tide turned. The Olympians pressed forward with a fury no Titan could match. Cronus, proud and unyielding, fought to the last. But the prophecy, as always, unfolded without mercy. The Titans fell. One by one they were driven down, cast from the high places of the earth. Zeus did not slay them. He imprisoned them, as his father had done before. Deep into Tartarus, they were hurled, bound in chains forged by the 100-handed ones, behind bronze gates that would never rust or break. Only a few escaped that fate: Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had sided with the gods, and Themis, who foresaw the justice of their rule. So ended the reign of the Titans. The sky cleared, and the world, scarred by fire and war, began to heal. The throne passed to Zeus, not by birthright, but by might and wisdom and fate fulfilled. Yet even as he claimed the heavens, the shadow of Cronus's curse lingered behind him, like the echo of an old song. For power, once seized, must always be watched, and no ruler, god or mortal, sits secure forever. When the war was over and the world lay quiet beneath the sky once more, the victors stood amidst the rubble of creation. The Titans were chained in the depths of Tartarus, their groans swallowed by that black abyss from which no echo returned. The old order had been broken, but with the storm of war ended, the gods faced a new challenge, perhaps greater than any battle, to rule. For conquest may be won with fire and fury, but rule demands judgment, patience, and division. The world was wide and wild, and filled with powers both known and yet unnamed. It could not be held by one alone. Zeus, eldest among the gods now born again, stood at the center of this new age. Though not the firstborn, he was first in might, first in cunning, and first to move when action was demanded. But the old laws, carved not on stone, but into the bones of the cosmos itself, did not grant him sole dominion. He had two brothers, both tempered by war and made strong in their own right: Poseidon, who had driven the sea to foam in his wrath, and Hades, who had worn the helm of darkness and moved unseen through battlefield and cavern alike. They too had shed blood, taken risks, and suffered loss. The throne of the cosmos could not belong to Zeus alone, lest the seeds of war be sown anew, this time among brothers. And so the three gathered, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and cast lots to divide the realms of the world. Not through bickering or force, but by fate itself, did the dice fall. This was no child's game. The casting of lots was sacred, guided by the same power that had spoken through Gaia's whispers and shaped the course of the Titanomachy. They threw the bones and waited. When they landed, the world was drawn into 3 great dominions. To Zeus fell the sky, the broad heavens, the air between stars and peaks. He became Lord of thunder and rain, master of storm and cloud, and the undisputed king of Olympus. His voice would echo in thunderclaps. His fury would blaze in lightning, and the eagle became his herald, soaring high above all. To Poseidon fell the sea, deep and restless, full of mystery and monsters. He took the oceans, the rivers, and every spring that bubbled from the earth. With his trident, he could shatter cliffs and stir the tides to rage or calm. Beneath the waves he built a palace of coral and gold, and there he ruled not only over fish and current, but over creatures older than time, sea serpents, leviathans, and things whose names had never been spoken aloud. To Hades fell the underworld, the land of the dead. It was not a prize most would have chosen, but Hades took it with quiet resolve. He ruled the shadowed realm with stern dignity, his kingdom hidden beneath the earth where the sun did not shine. There he became master of the shades, the judge of mortal souls, and guardian of wealth hidden in the deeps, gems, metals, and secrets lost to time. Though men feared his name and whispered it only when necessary, Hades kept the balance between life and death, and it was said he never once broke the laws he was sworn to uphold. The earth itself, Gaia's own flesh, was left as a common realm, shared by all. The mountains belonged to no one, the fields were roamed by mortals and spirits alike, and the forests grew wild under no single banner. It was a realm in between, where gods might walk and mortals might see them. But it was also where ambition brewed, and where fate would continue to work its quiet will. Thus, the world was ordered, sky, sea, and underworld. The 3 brothers, now kings in their own realms, swore not to war among themselves, lest the world break anew. They built their thrones and gathered their followers. On Mount Olympus, high above the clouds, Zeus called the gods to council. There beside him stood his sisters, Hera, proud and sharp as winter ice, Demeter, whose steps awakened spring, and Hestia, ever burning at the hearth of every home. And others came, new and old, Athena, born from wisdom and war, Apollo, golden and far-seeing, Artemis, silent and swift, Ares, bloody-handed, Hermes, fleet of foot and mind, Hephaestus, limping but brilliant, and Aphrodite, whose smile could unravel kings. It was the beginning of a new age, the age of Olympus. But though the thrones had been set and the realms divided, the world would not stay still for long. The gods, for all their power, were not immune to pride, nor love, nor rage, and the mortals who now began to rise across the lands would bring their own stories, their own wars, and their own share of sorrow. The heavens had been won, but peace is never simple when gods sit the throne. When the smoke of war faded and the world was cast once more in sunlight, Mount Olympus became the seat of a new and glittering court. The Titans had ruled from Mount Othrys in the south, harsh, ancient, and wrapped in storm. But Olympus, in the north, stood higher still, its summit crowned in cloud and crowned in myth. The mountain was not merely a place, but a threshold, a place where sky met stone, where the mortal world ended and the divine began. It was here that Zeus, having claimed the heavens by fate and force, gathered the new pantheon of gods. The Olympian court did not mirror mortal kingdoms. There were no brick-paved roads leading to its gates, no heralds announcing guests, no armies stationed at its base. The gods needed no walls to guard them. The air itself served as their boundary, a veil too high for mortal breath. Olympus was said to have no storms, no snow, no decay. Its halls were of marble and cloud, its ceilings vaulted with starlight, and its corridors stretched wide enough for wind to wander freely. Here, the gods walked not as shadows or omens, but in full form, radiant, terrible, and more alive than anything that walked the earth below. At the summit of Olympus stood Zeus, king of gods and men, seated upon a throne of thunder. He ruled not by brute strength alone, though his power was unmatched, but by the will of fate and the long memory of war. His voice carried like distant thunder, his eyes saw beyond clouds and time, and in his hand he carried the thunderbolt, the Cyclops' gift, the symbol of judgment swift and final. But even he did not rule alone. Around him stood the others, each a pillar in the new order of the world. Hera sat beside him, not merely as wife, but as queen, sovereign in her own right. She was the goddess of marriage, of queenship and childbirth, and the silent fury of a woman wronged. Proud and unyielding, Hera remembered every slight, and her jealousy would one day shape the fates of gods and mortals alike. Her crown was not one given, but earned, forged in the fires of betrayal and bound by the sacred oaths of Olympus. Demeter came next, the goddess of grain and growth. Where her feet touched the earth, the soil softened and seeds stirred. Her presence brought harvest and plenty, and without her, the fields grew barren. She did not sit high among the thunder and marble, but walked often in the world below, watching over the ploughmen and mothers who whispered her name at dawn. She was older than most, quieter than many, but none doubted her power. Then there was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, and the last to be freed from her father's belly. She asked for no temple, no grand myths, no wars or lovers. She tended the eternal flame in the center of Olympus and watched over every home and hearth on earth. Her power was gentle but ever present, for as long as fire burned in a household, Hestia lived there too. The younger gods came in time, some born in Olympus, others delivered by strange means. Athena was first among them, born not of womb, but of wisdom. When Zeus swallowed Metis, fearing her unborn child would surpass him, he thought the matter ended. But Metis did not die. She lived within him, whispering, scheming, crafting knowledge in the dark. One day, Zeus groaned in agony, and with a blow to his skull, Athena sprang forth, fully grown, clad in bronze, spear in hand, her eyes clear and sharp as flint. She became goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just war, a virgin warrior with no patience for frivolity. Apollo and Artemis came next, twins born of Leto, a titaness who wandered long and weary to find a place to give birth. No land dared offer her sanctuary, for Hera's wrath was vast and vengeful. At last, the floating island of Delos accepted her, and there she bore her children. Apollo, golden-haired and bright, became the god of light, prophecy, music, and healing. His sister Artemis, swift and silver, was goddess of the hunt, of wild things and moonlight. Together, they marked a new generation of gods, restless, radiant, and intimately tied to the mortal world. Then came Ares, god of war and slaughter, son of Zeus and Hera, but beloved by neither. He was strength without discipline, rage without cause, and though his name was feared, he was not often honored. War followed him like a shadow, and he gloried in its chaos, but he was often bested by cunning and wisdom. His opposite was Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, master of craft and flame. Born of Hera alone, or thrown from Olympus by Zeus, both tales are told, he found solace in metal, building wonders with hammer and fire. From his hands came armor, palaces, and automatons. Though limping and twisted, he was among the most indispensable of the gods. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and desire, arrived not by birth but by foam, born of Uranus's severed flesh cast into the sea. She rose from the surf at Cyprus, as beautiful as she was dangerous. Love, lust, jealousy, and ruin followed her wherever she went. Even Zeus could not command her fully. She bound gods and mortals alike with a glance, and though she smiled often, it was never without consequence. Hermes, the trickster and herald, came last of this early court, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. He moved swiftly between worlds, winged sandals at his feet, and a mischievous grin on his lips. He stole Apollo's cattle on the day of his birth, sang a song to cover the theft, and made himself indispensable before he could walk. He became the messenger of the gods, guide of souls, patron of thieves and travelers. Where Hermes went, borders dissolved. This was the Olympian court, a gathering not of saints, but of powers, raw, flawed, radiant, and vast. They quarreled as siblings do, took sides in mortal affairs, fell in love, betrayed each other, waged petty rivalries, and enacted divine justice. But above all, they ruled. From Olympus they watched the world below and shaped it to their will. The age of Titans was gone, but in its place came an era of stories, of gods who walked among men, of heroes born from their unions, and of a world forever changed by the hands of the divine. The world had its rulers now, but peace, as ever, was a fragile thing, and fate had not yet spoken its last word. Long before men raised cities of marble or carved their prayers into stone, there were no humans upon the earth. The gods ruled alone, their courts high upon Olympus, their domains vast and varied. The world beneath them was green and wild, teeming with beasts and silent mountains. But there were no hands to till the soil, no voices to sing to the stars, no fire to warm the night. It was Prometheus, a titan of the old blood, who first imagined the shape of man. He was no friend to Cronus, nor was he ever counted among those chained in Tartarus. During the War of the Titans, Prometheus had sided with Zeus, not out of love or loyalty, but out of foresight, for he bore the gift of prophecy, and he knew which way the storm would break. Prometheus's name meant forethought, and it suited him. He was brother to Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and never was a pair of brothers more different. Where Epimetheus acted in haste and repented in leisure, Prometheus saw farther, thought longer, and questioned the justice of every decree, even those issued by the king of the gods himself. He walked the line between Titan and Olympian, old world and new, a creature of reason in a cosmos ruled by passion and power. It was he who first shaped mankind. Some say he sculpted them from clay beside the banks of a river, his fingers smoothing mud into limbs, his breath giving them life. Others claim he molded them in the image of the gods, upright and thoughtful, gifted with the spark of invention. But however it happened, the first men were made, and they were weak, soft of skin, slow of foot, clawless, fangless, and lacking in both fur and fire. They were naked beneath the sky, trembling in winter, defenseless against the beasts of the world. Prometheus looked upon them and pitied them. He went to Olympus and asked that man be given a gift, something to help them survive, something to raise them above the level of animals. But Zeus refused. He saw in mortals not promise, but peril. The god king had only just seized his throne and was wary of new forces rising beneath him. "Let them live," he said, "but let them fear. Let them know their place beneath the gods." Fire, he declared, was the privilege of immortals. The hearth flame of Hestia, the thunderbolt of Zeus, the forge of Hephaestus, these were not for mortal hands. But Prometheus, stubborn and just, did not yield. In secret, he climbed to the heavens, stole a flame from the forge of Hephaestus, and hid it in a hollow fennel stalk. Carrying it down from Olympus, he gave it to man. For the first time, fire crackled beneath the stars, smoke rose in spirals above the treetops, light pushed back the darkness. With fire came warmth, safety, cooking, metal, language, craft. Humanity, once cold and voiceless, began to build, and with fire came defiance too. Zeus was not long in discovering the theft. His fury was terrible. To punish mankind, he commissioned the gods to create a gift, though it was a curse in disguise. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, a woman of perfect beauty. Aphrodite gave her charm, Hermes gave her cunning, and Athena clothed her in silver raiment. Her name was Pandora, meaning all gifted, and she was given a sealed jar, mistranslated in later ages as a box, containing the sorrows of the world, disease, toil, grief, madness, envy, and death itself. Epimetheus, ever the fool, took her into his home despite Prometheus's warnings. And when Pandora, driven by curiosity, the final gift of the gods, opened the jar, the evil spilled out into the world like smoke from a fire too long confined. Mankind, who had known peace in their brief golden youth, now found themselves hunted by fate. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. War bled them dry. Age stooped their backs. Only hope remained inside the jar, some say by accident, others say by design. A flickering light amid the gloom. But Prometheus's punishment had not yet come. For the crime of defying Olympus, Zeus ordered him chained to a mountain at the edge of the world. Some say the Caucasus, others say a place lost to myth. There he was bound in adamantine chains, unbreakable and eternal. Each day, an eagle born of Typhon or sent by Zeus would descend and feast upon his liver. Each night, it would grow back, and each morning the torment would begin again. He was immortal, and so the suffering could not kill him. He endured it for generations, long after kingdoms rose and fell, long after men forgot the gods who made them. And yet, even in chains, Prometheus did not repent. He knew a secret, a truth Zeus feared above all, that one day the king of the gods would fall, not by blade or rebellion, but by his own seed. It was this knowledge that protected Prometheus, for Zeus could not destroy him without first uncovering the name of the woman who would bear his doom. So the Titan waited, bound but unbowed, as men lit fires in the dark and told stories of the one who had dared to steal from the gods. The gods, for all their glory, were not alone in shaping the world. Beneath Olympus, on the soil that drank the rain and felt the sun's warmth, mankind struggled, rose, and fell, again and again. Their lives, short and flickering beside the long memories of the immortals, still left a mark. And though Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon stirred the seas, it was the deeds of mortals that filled the earth with both beauty and sorrow. The poets who lived after would look back on this long, winding journey and see not one mankind, but many, each born into its own era, marked by the blessings and punishments of the gods. It was Hesiod, the Boeotian farmer and poet, who first set these ages into words, dividing the long march of human existence into 5 distinct epochs: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each was less than the one before, save one. In the beginning, there was the Golden Age, and it was unlike any time that followed. It came during the reign of Cronus, before the gods had learned to fear rebellion, and before the earth bore the weight of iron or war. In those days, men lived like gods themselves, free from pain, untouched by age, and unburdened by toil. The earth gave forth her bounty without coaxing, offering harvests in every season. There was no need for laws or swords, no need for kings or coins. These early mortals knew no hunger, no sickness, no grief. When their time came, they did not wither or suffer, but died as if falling into sleep, their spirits becoming guardians, pure and watchful, wandering the world as kindly daimones, protectors of justice and peace. Theirs was a life of harmony, and theirs was the closest any mortal would ever come to Eden. But the Golden Age passed, as all golden things do. With the fall of Cronus and the rise of Zeus, the Silver Age dawned, a time of beauty dimmer and souls less noble. These mortals grew tall and strong, living long lives, but they lacked the wisdom and restraint of the golden race. They lingered in childhood for 100 years, ignorant and pampered, only to grow into violent, arrogant men who refused to honor the gods or heed their decrees. They built no temples, gave no offerings, and mocked the laws of Olympus. For this, Zeus struck them down. Their spirits did not become guardians or watchful daimones, but faded into the underworld, pale and forgotten. Theirs was a race lost to pride and disobedience, a mirror of divine fear come true. Then came the Bronze Age, born of ash trees, the same trees used for spears and shields. These were not gentle men. They were creatures of war, mighty and hard, their very flesh said to be forged from bronze. Their homes were bronze, their tools were bronze, their hearts seemed cast from the same metal. They lived for battle and died by it, sowing the world with blood and ash. They were terrible to behold, but not evil, only driven by the rhythm of war drums and the clash of arms. They built no cities, wrote no poems, carved no statues. When they died, they left little behind but shattered swords and empty fields. Even the gods did not mourn their passing. They sank into Hades without echo or prayer. Yet not all decline is steady. From the blood and smoke of the Bronze Age rose a brief and brilliant light, the heroic age, a time unlike any other. It was not part of the descent, but an interlude of glory before the fall. These mortals were greater than those who came before or after. They were the demigods, the sons and daughters of gods and men. They built cities, sailed seas, and carved their names into the memory of the world. This was the age of Perseus and Heracles, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and the Argonauts, of Hector and Achilles and Odysseus. They fought great wars, against monsters, against foreign kings, and finally against each other at Troy. Many died young, and many more died forgotten, but their stories lingered, carried in song and stone, in epics and prayers. Some were granted a place in the Isles of the Blessed, far beyond ocean's edge, where heroes dwell in peace and sunlight forever. The heroic age did not last, but while it burned, it lit the world. And then came the age that Hesiod called his own, the Iron Age, where we still dwell. This is a time of sorrow and toil, a world grown old and heavy. Men now labor from dawn to dusk, planting seeds in bitter soil, raising children amid war and famine, growing old with pain and fear. In the Iron Age, bonds break easily, between friends, between kin, between guest and host. Justice, once tall and golden, now walks with her eyes averted. Lies are many, oaths are cheap, and the gods, if they still watch, do so with silence. In this age, mortals build towers but forget their ancestors. They chase gold and power and cut down the forests that fed them. It is an age of struggle, and it is said that one day even this will pass. One day, the gods will turn their backs entirely. One day, Zeus will cast down his thunderbolt, and humankind will vanish like smoke on the wind. Yet for all that, the Iron Age endures. Men still build, still hope, still tell stories of a time when mortals were golden and gods walked among them. And perhaps that hope, fragile though it is the one gift Zeus did not take back when Pandora opened the jar. In the waning light between the age of gods and the age of men, there came a generation of mortals unlike those before or after, men born not from clay alone, but from divine blood and mortal wombs, shaped by both Olympus and earth. These were the heroes. Their lives were brief, their fates often cruel, but their names would echo through time like the rumble of a distant storm. Among the first and greatest of them was Perseus, slayer of monsters, founder of dynasties, and by blood and deed, the forerunner of all who would wear a hero's crown. Perseus's tale begins not in battle, but in prophecy and fear. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, daughter to King Acrisius. The king, like all kings of that age, feared what he could not control. An oracle warned him that his daughter would bear a son destined to kill him. Such prophecies, in myth as in life, cannot be bribed or reasoned with. So Acrisius did what kings so often do when faced with a truth they fear. He sought to destroy the cause. He locked Danae in a tower of bronze beneath the earth, a room sealed against time and men alike. But the gods, as they often did, laughed at mortal precautions. Zeus, in the form of golden rain, slipped through cracks no wall could keep and fell upon Danae in her solitude. From that union, Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the child, he dared not spill royal blood directly, for even tyrants fear the wrath of the gods. Instead, he placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, trusting Poseidon or chance to drown them. But the sea is as fickle as fate. The chest did not sink, but drifted across the wine-dark waves to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys drew it ashore. He took them in, raised Perseus as his own, and in time the boy grew tall and strong, with the bearing of kings and the eyes of storms. But peace is never a long companion to those who carry destiny. The ruler of Seriphos, King Polydectes, took notice of Danae's beauty and desired her. Perseus, grown into manhood, stood between his mother and the king, a wall of defiance. Polydectes, unable to strike the sun without dishonoring himself, chose cunning over strength. He announced a false marriage, some say to Hippodamia, and demanded that all men of the island offer him a gift. Perseus, without gold or horses, boasted that he would instead bring the king a greater prize, the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon whose gaze could turn flesh to stone. The task was cruel, and Polydectes knew it. No man who had sought Medusa had ever returned. She was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, born of ancient sea deities, hideous and winged, their heads wreathed in snakes, their eyes cursed. Only Medusa was mortal. Her sisters were immortal, and none could be approached without peril. But the gods, who watched the world with curious eyes, favored Perseus. Athena, born from her father's head, and never one to forget a slight. Medusa, after all, had once been a maiden in her temple, until Poseidon's violence and pride had defiled it, lent her shield to the young hero. It was polished like a mirror, and in its reflection, one could look upon a Gorgon without meeting her gaze. Hermes, swift and shrewd, gave him a curved sword and winged sandals to fly, and directed him to the Graeae, the grey sisters who shared a single eye between them and knew the secret path to the Gorgon's lair. Perseus, through wit and will, stole their eye and bargained for the truth. They told him of the nymphs who kept the sacred items he would need, the helm of Hades, which made its wearer invisible, a kibisis, a magical sack to contain the Gorgon's head, and knowledge of the place beyond ocean's edge, where night never lifts and the Gorgons sleep among ancient stone. Armed with these divine gifts, Perseus flew over sea and desert until he reached the ends of the earth. He found them sleeping, Medusa and her sisters, curled in a shadowed grove, ringed by the statues of those who had come before. Perseus dared not look directly, and so with Athena's shield held before him, he walked backward, step by cautious step, until he stood over the sleeping Gorgon. With one swift stroke, he severed her head, and from her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysa, the warrior with a golden blade, children of Poseidon, born in death. As Medusa's sisters screamed and clawed the air, Perseus vanished into mist, hidden by the helm of darkness. The deed was done. He returned by the long road, his prize heavy in the sack, its power undiminished. On the way, he passed the shores of Ethiopia, where the sea god had sent a monster to punish King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia for their vanity. Their daughter, Andromeda, had been chained to a rock as sacrifice. Perseus, beholding her beauty and innocence, slew the beast, turned it to stone with the Gorgon's head, and claimed her as his bride. She would follow him westward, becoming the mother of his line. When at last he returned to Seriphos, Polydectes scoffed at his tale. So Perseus reached into the sack and withdrew the severed head. The king and his court were turned to stone where they stood. Dictys, the fisherman who had shown kindness to a mother and her child, became king in his stead. The cycle of cruelty was broken, if only for a time. But prophecy, once spoken, is not so easily undone. Perseus journeyed to Argos, where King Acrisius, still haunted by the words of the oracle, fled rather than face the boy he had once condemned to death. Yet fate does not forget. At the funeral games of a neighboring king, Perseus, throwing a discus, struck an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, his grandfather, who died without ever knowing that his death was no murder, but an accident long foretold. So the circle closed, as they always do in myth. Perseus had fulfilled the prophecy, though not by malice. He had slain a monster, saved a maiden, founded a line of kings, and carried the weight of fate with dignity. He would not live forever, but his name would. For from his blood would come Heracles, and from Heracles, the next chapter in the story of the gods and men. If Perseus was the first great hero, Heracles was the mightiest. His name, like thunder over distant mountains, carried weight across every land touched by Hellenic breath. He was not merely strong, but larger than life itself, straddling the border between man and God, joy and grief, triumph and tragedy. He was the great-grandson of Perseus, a scion of Argos, and a son of Zeus. And though the gods would bless him with strength, they would curse him with suffering. His birth was itself a trick of time. Zeus, ever lustful, desired Alcmene, wife of the Theban general Amphitryon. Disguised as her husband, the king of gods lay with her, extending a single night into threefold length. From that union came Heracles, and from Amphitryon, a twin, Iphicles, mortal and unblessed. Hera, as always, watched from her throne with a cold and bitter eye. She knew her husband's ways, and she knew too well the threat that this child, half god though he was, might one day pose to her own dominion. Even in the cradle, Heracles bore the mark of the divine. Hera, seeking to destroy him early, sent 2 serpents into the nursery to strangle the infant. But the child reached out with plump hands and throttled them both, one in each fist, before any nurse could scream. From that moment, his fame began to grow. As a youth, he trained in all the arts befitting a nobleman: music, archery, wrestling, and chariot driving. Yet there was something wild in him, a restlessness of soul that no lyre or tutor could tame. Manhood brought him both love and ruin. He married Megara, daughter of the Theban king Creon, and for a time lived in peace, fathering sons and defending his city. But Hera had not forgotten. In a fit of divine wrath, she clouded Heracles' mind with madness. Raging through his own halls, he slew his wife and children with the same hands that had once cradled them. When the madness passed and his vision cleared, he beheld the blood and ruin of his own house. His cries reached Olympus, but no god answered. To atone, he sought out the oracle of Delphi. The Pythia, speaking in riddles, told him he must submit to the will of Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, his cousin, lesser in strength, but greater in fate. Only through servitude, through suffering, could Heracles earn redemption. Thus began the 12 labours, deeds so great and terrible that even the gods took notice. The first labour was to slay the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden hide could not be pierced by mortal weapons. Heracles cornered it in its cave and strangled it with his bare hands. He flayed the beast using its own claw and wore the skin as armour thereafter, a second hide to shield him from the world. The second was the Linnaean Hydra, a serpent with 9 heads, 2 of which would grow back for everyone severed. Heracles battled it in the swamps, aided by his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized the stumps as they were cut. From the last head, immortal and venomous, Heracles harvested its ichor and dipped his arrows in it, making them deadly even to gods. The third labor was the capture of the Ceryneian hind, a golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis. Heracles chased it for a year across hills and rivers before gently capturing it alive, earning the goddess's reluctant approval. The fourth labor led him to the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous beast of the wild. He wrestled it in the snow-covered heights of Arcadia and dragged it back to Tiryns bound in chains, laughing as Eurystheus hid in terror inside a bronze jar. The fifth task was less glorious: to clean the Augean stables, home to thousands of cattle, untouched by broom or shovel for decades. Heracles, ever the problem solver, rerouted rivers to wash away the filth in a single day. The sixth was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and razor-feathered wings. With the aid of Athena's rattle, he startled them into flight and shot them down from the sky. The seventh labor took him far west to capture the Cretan bull, a beast of divine origin that had fathered the Minotaur. Heracles wrestled it and brought it back alive, while the bull's gaze burned with madness and sea salt fury. The eighth labor sent him north to Thrace, where he tamed the mares of Diomedes, flesh-eating horses that gnashed their teeth for human meat. He fed Diomedes, their master, to them, and the beasts grew docile. The ninth labor required diplomacy and blood. Heracles was sent to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Though the queen agreed to gift it peacefully, Hera spread rumors among the warrior women, and battle broke out. Heracles slew Hippolyta and escaped with the belt. The 10th led him to the edge of the known world, to Erythea, where he stole the cattle of Geryon, a triple-bodied giant. He built the pillars of Heracles at the Strait of Gibraltar and fought the giant, his herdsman, and his hound all at once before driving the red cattle back across continents. But Eurystheus, seeking to discredit him, declared 2 labors invalid, claiming Iolaus had helped with the Hydra and the rivers with the stables. 2 more were required. The 11th was to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a dragon coiled around the tree's base. Heracles tricked Atlas, the sky-bearer, into retrieving the apples while he held the heavens. When Atlas tried to leave him the burden, Heracles asked for a moment to adjust his cloak and took back the sky while fleeing with the fruit. The 12th and final labor was the most harrowing: to descend into Hades itself and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. Armed with nothing but his strength, Heracles journeyed to the underworld, presented himself before Hades, and with the god's grim permission, wrestled Cerberus into submission and led the beast, snarling and frothing, into the land of the living. With that final labor, his redemption was won. Yet Heracles' life was not yet at peace. He fought more battles, took new wives, and fathered many children. But Hera's hatred endured. In the end, it was not blade or monster that killed him, but the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, smeared upon a tunic gifted by his wife Deianira, who believed it a love charm. As the poison burned through his flesh, Heracles built his own pyre upon Mount Oeta. No mortal dared light it, until Philoctetes, a simple shepherd, stepped forward. For that, he was given the hero's bow. Heracles was consumed by flame, but in death he was reborn. Zeus lifted him to Olympus, where he was granted immortality and married to Hebe, goddess of youth. He became not just a hero, but a god. His labors, born of grief and guilt, became the very measure of heroism. Where others were remembered in story, Heracles was remembered in shrines, in games, and in the hearts of men who, though mortal, dared to dream of greatness. If Heracles was the greatest of Greek heroes, then Theseus was the most political, the most cunning, the most human. He was not merely a slayer of beasts or a breaker of curses. He was a builder of cities, a weaver of laws, and the founding spirit of Athens, the city that would one day name itself the cradle of civilization. His story is tangled with myth and memory, with the thunder of heroes and the whisper of politics. In him lived both brute strength and bright reason, the dual spirit of a nation that worshipped Athena with spear in hand and olive branch on the brow. Theseus was born of two fathers, King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, god of the sea. His mother Athena lay with both on the same night, one mortal, one divine. From this double union came a boy of destiny, raised far from Athens in the city of Troezen, unaware of the great blood in his veins. Before leaving, Aegeus had hidden a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone, telling Athena that when the boy was strong enough to lift the stone, he would be ready to claim his birthright. In time, Theseus grew tall and sharp-eyed, restless in his limbs and mind. At 16, he moved the stone with a grunt and a grin, and took up his father's tokens. Many would have travelled the easy road to Athens by sea, but Theseus chose the land route, the longer, more perilous way, for he believed that true kingship must be earned, not inherited. And so began the 6 labours of Theseus, not vast or godlike like Heracles' trials, but earthy and intimate, each a monster of the road, a terror to the common man. He defeated Periphetes, the club-bearer, taking his weapon as a symbol. He slew Sinis, who tied travellers to bent pine trees and tore them in two. He pushed Siren from the cliffs into the sea, ending the reign of a man who forced passers-by to wash his feet, only to kick them to their deaths. He overcame Tersion, the wrestler, by outmatching brute force with technique, and Procrustes, who made beds fit travellers by stretching or cutting them, found his own death in the same iron frame. Theseus did not just survive, he cleaned the land as he passed through it, paving the way for Athens itself to rise. When he arrived in Athens, King Aegeus did not recognize him. The queen, Medea, now wife to Aegeus, and still seething with old sorceries, saw the threat in the boy and urged the king to poison him. But Theseus presented the sword and sandals, and at the last moment Aegeus cast the cup aside, embracing his son before all the court. Joy, of course, never lingered long in myths. Trouble was already stirring in the east. For years, Athens had suffered under a bitter tribute. In a war with the island of Crete, Athens had been defeated, and as punishment, King Minos demanded 7 young men and 7 maidens be sent every 9 years to feed the Minotaur, a monstrous half-man born of lust and vengeance, kept in a twisting labyrinth beneath the palace at Knossos. This creature had been born from Minos' pride. When Poseidon sent a bull from the sea, Minos was meant to sacrifice it, but instead he kept it for himself. In punishment, the gods cursed his wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the beast. From their unnatural union came the Minotaur, Asterius, horned and violent, a living shame sealed away in the maze designed by Daedalus, the great inventor. Theseus, learning of the tribute, volunteered himself among the chosen. He would go not as a lamb to slaughter, but as a hunter into the lair. Before departure, he promised his father that if he succeeded, he would return with white sails upon his ship. If he failed, the sails would remain black. Upon arrival in Crete, fate turned again. Ariadne, daughter of Minos and half-sister to the Minotaur, saw Theseus and loved him. She gave him a gift, a ball of thread, a clue, and the secret to the labyrinth's winding paths. That night, Theseus entered the maze. In its dark coils, where stone turned endlessly into stone, he found the beast. They fought without words, one prince against one nightmare. Theseus, armed with skill and a sharpened blade, struck the creature down, then followed the thread back into the light. He fled with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, sailing into the Aegean. Yet love, in Greek stories, is never simple. On the island of Naxos, Theseus abandoned Ariadne. Some say Dionysus claimed her for his own. Others say Theseus feared what a Cretan bride might mean for an Athenian throne. She woke alone and wept beneath unfamiliar stars. Theseus continued home, but in his sorrow or forgetfulness, he failed to change the sails. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus saw black on the horizon and believed his son dead. Grief-stricken, he leapt into the sea, which still bears his name, the Aegean. Now king, Theseus did not rest. He unified Attica, the region around Athens, binding its villages into one city-state. He established festivals and games, temples and laws. He was a hero of governance as much as of combat. He ventured again and again into myth, fighting alongside Heracles against the Amazons, journeying to the underworld with Pirithous, his reckless friend, to steal Persephone herself from Hades. That journey ended in failure. Pirithous was swallowed by the earth, and Theseus was trapped upon the chair of forgetfulness, his memory eroded by the air of death. Only Heracles, on his own journey, tore him free. But time, as ever, turns. In the end, the Athenians, tired of kings and haunted by new heroes and new philosophies, drove Theseus into exile. He fled to the island of Skyros, where he was betrayed by a jealous king and cast from a cliff. His bones would later be retrieved by the Athenians and buried in honor, but at the time of his death, he was alone, no crowd, no crown, no chorus. And yet, his legacy endured. Where Heracles symbolized the strength of the body, Theseus embodied the strength of the polis, the city, the law, the people bound by more than blood. Athens would rise on his shoulders, and though it would worship Athena, it would remember the king who built its bones. Long before Troy burned and long after the Titans fell, there came a voyage unlike any other. A quest that crossed continents and gods, bound heroes into brotherhood, and ended in betrayal and exile. It was a tale of dragons and oaths, of kings usurped and thrones reclaimed. And at the center of it all was Jason, a prince exiled in childhood, a hero groomed not by war or prophecy, but by the long, slow fire of vengeance. His tale began in Iolcus, a coastal kingdom in Thessaly, where King Aeson, Jason's father, had been usurped by his own brother Peleus, a man who worshipped no law but power. Fearing the boy who might one day rise against him, Peleus sought to kill Jason at birth. But Aeson, forewarned, sent the infant away, smuggled from court and raised in secret by the wise centaur Chiron, who had trained Achilles, Asclepius, and other sons of fate. Jason grew strong in the wild, fed on honey and knowledge, his limbs hardened by hunting, his mind by songs of kings who had fallen and risen again. Years passed. Jason returned to Iolcus, a man. clad in a single sandal, for as he crossed the river Anaurus, he had lost one in the muddy current, while carrying an old woman across. The woman, of course, was Hera in disguise, testing the young hero. When he entered the city, Peleus saw the one-sandaled stranger and turned pale, for the oracle had once warned him, "Beware the man who comes with one shoe." Jason, bold but not foolish, did not draw a sword or raise a cry. He spoke plainly. He was Aeson's son and rightful heir. Peleus, too shrewd to strike openly, feigned welcome and offered a test. "If you wish to be king," he said, "then prove yourself worthy. Retrieve for me the golden fleece from the far land of Colchis. Bring back that ancient prize, and I will yield the crown." The ram had flown him across the sea, and when Phrixus reached safety in Colchis, he sacrificed the beast in gratitude. Its fleece, gold as fire, was nailed to an oak in a sacred grove, guarded by serpents and shadow, watched over by King Aeetes, son of the sun god Helios. No Greek had ever gone there and returned. But Jason accepted the challenge. He summoned the greatest heroes of his time to join him, and they came, not as soldiers, but as volunteers, each seeking glory. Heracles came, and Orpheus with his lyre, Atalanta the huntress, Castor and Pollux, the sons of Zeus, Meleager, Theseus, Zetes and Calais, winged sons of the north wind, 50 heroes in all. Together they boarded a ship named Argo, built by Argus under Athena's guidance. In its prow, she set a piece of sacred oak from Dodona, a timber that could speak in prophecy. The ship itself was a character in the tale, whispering warnings and guiding fate. They sailed east, past shores and tempests, into legend. Their first trials were not of monsters, but of men. On Lemnos, they met a land ruled by women, who had slain all their husbands. There, Jason lay with Hypsipyle, queen of the isle, and begot sons he would never see grown. In Thrace, they encountered the blind seer Phineus, tormented by the harpies who fouled his food. The winged Boreads drove the creatures off, earning Phineus's prophecy, a path through the deadly clashing rocks, 2 cliffs that slammed shut like jaws upon any who tried to pass. At Phineus's advice, they released a dove. It flew through and lost only a single tail feather. The Argo followed at full speed, and the rocks caught her stern, but just barely. From then on, the passage remained still. The sea, it seemed, respected those who dared. At last, they reached Colchis, a land of fire and iron. King Aeetes did not kill them on sight. Jason was a stranger, and in that ancient world, strangers were sacred. But Aeetes agreed to grant the fleece only if Jason completed 3 tasks: yoke fire-breathing bulls, plough a field with them, sow it with dragon's teeth, and then defeat the warriors who would rise from the soil. These were not tests of courage, but of impossibility. It would have ended there, had the gods not intervened. Eros, at Hera's urging, struck Medea, daughter of Aeetes, with an arrow of love. She was a priestess of Hecate, versed in herbs and poison, untouched by men, cold as moonlight. But at the sight of Jason, her heart betrayed her. She gave him a potion to shield him from flame, taught him to hurl a stone among the earthborn warriors so they would turn on one another, and at last led him to the fleece itself, guarded by a serpent that never slept. Medea sang spells, and the beast sank into slumber. Jason seized the fleece, brilliant and soft as molten gold, and fled with Medea into the dark. Aeetes pursued them with ships, but the lovers had bought time with blood. Medea had taken her young brother Absyrtus, cut him into pieces, and scattered them in the sea, forcing her father to stop and gather the limbs for burial. The Argo slipped away, stained by crime and magic. Their return was a wandering, past Scylla and Charybdis, through lands of danger and delay. At length, they returned to Iolcus. But Peleus refused to yield the crown. Medea, in vengeance, tricked his daughters into cutting him to pieces and boiling him alive, claiming it was a spell of rejuvenation. Horrified, the people rose up. Jason, now tainted by treachery, was exiled. He fled to Corinth, where he and Medea lived for years in uneasy peace. But Jason, ever seeking legitimacy, cast Medea aside and chose a Corinthian princess for marriage. Medea, wronged and vengeful, unleashed a fury no man could endure. She poisoned the bride's gown, burning her to ash, and murdered her own sons by Jason. Then she fled, carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift from her grandfather Helios. Jason, broken, returned to Iolcus. In his final days he wandered among ruins, forgotten. One day, resting beneath the Argo, now dry-docked and decaying, a beam broke loose and struck his skull. So passed the great hero, not in battle, not in glory, but in silence, beneath the bones of his past. Yet the tale of Jason endured, for in the quest for the fleece, in the gathering of heroes, in love turned sour and greatness undone, Greece found one of its most enduring myths, the promise and price of ambition. There are few bloodlines in Greek myth more accursed than the royal house of Thebes, where most heroes battled monsters or sailed for distant thrones. The Theban kings fought their own kin and warred against the past itself. Their legacy is not carved in bronze or sung in triumph, but written in riddles, madness, and murder. Even the city's foundation was steeped in omens and unrest. Thebes began with a quest. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, set out to find his sister after Zeus abducted her in the guise of a white bull. Unable to recover her, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, who told him to abandon his search and instead follow a cow until it lay down. There, he was to found a city. Obedient, he wandered until the beast collapsed upon a hill. But when Cadmus sent his companions for water, they met their deaths at the hands of a serpent, sacred to Ares, guarding a spring. Cadmus slew the serpent himself, and at Athena's bidding, sowed its teeth into the soil. From the earth sprang armed warriors, the Spartoi, or sown men, who turned on one another until only 5 remained. These 5 became the noble families of Thebes, and Cadmus their king. But the slaying of Ares' serpent drew divine wrath. Cadmus served the war god for 8 years in penance. He married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and the gods themselves came to their wedding. The couple received a cursed necklace forged by Hephaestus, a thing of beauty that would bring ruin to all who wore it. And so the doom of Thebes began not in hatred, but in celebration, cursed by beauty and blood. Generations passed. Cadmus's daughters would meet cruel fates. Ino went mad and threw her child into the sea. Autono's son Actaeon was torn apart by his own hounds after glimpsing Artemis bathing. Semele, beloved by Zeus, was tricked by Hera into demanding that he reveal his true form, and died in flame. And Agave, in a frenzy of Dionysian madness, tore her own son Pentheus limb from limb, believing him to be a lion. But it was through Cadmus's great-great-grandson Laius that the true tragedy would unfold. Laius became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. Yet the gods had not forgiven the line of Cadmus. An oracle came. If Laius ever had a son, that child would kill his father and marry his mother. As in all Greek stories, the warning was not enough to prevent the sin. Laius lay with Jocasta, and a son was born. Terrified, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound, then gave him to a servant to be abandoned on Mount Cithaeron. But the servant, pitying the child, passed him to a shepherd, who in turn delivered him to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who were childless, and welcomed the boy as their own. They named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and never told him the truth of his blood. Oedipus grew into a clever and proud young man, but rumors of his birth reached him. Seeking truth, he journeyed to Delphi, where the oracle gave him the same prophecy once spoken to Laius, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unwittingly running toward his fate. On the road, at a crossroads near Daulis, he encountered a stranger, old, proud, and imperious. A quarrel broke out over the right of passage, and in the heat of rage, Oedipus slew the man and his attendants, never knowing that he had just killed his true father, Laius. He continued on to Thebes, which was under siege, not by an army, but by the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She devoured all who failed to answer her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Oedipus answered without hesitation. Man. The Sphinx, defeated, threw herself from a cliff. Thebes rejoiced. The city's deliverer was made king, and in gratitude he was given the widowed queen as his bride, Jocasta, his mother. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well and had 4 children, Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. But plague fell upon Thebes, and the oracle proclaimed the land was cursed by unpunished blood. Slowly, terribly, the truth unraveled. The old man at the crossroads, the queen's grief, the scarred feet, the servant who survived, and the blind prophet Tiresias, who named the king as both father and brother, son and husband. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus took her brooches and blinded himself, piercing his own eyes. He begged to be exiled and wandered the land as a wretched figure, guided only by Antigone's hand. In the hills near Colonus, he found sanctuary and, at last, a quiet death, swallowed by the earth, his grave a secret kept by the gods. But his children did not escape the curse. Eteocles and Polynices fought for the throne. When Polynices was exiled, he raised an army from Argos and led the 7 against Thebes, a war that bathed the city in blood. The brothers slew each other in single combat at the gates. Thebes survived, but its soul was broken. Antigone, the last to carry the old honor, buried her brother despite royal decree. For this, she was condemned by her uncle, Creon, and buried alive. The gods sent madness and death to his house as punishment. Thebes endured, but its kingship became a revolving door of ruin. The tale of Oedipus is not one of monsters slain or cities built. It is a tale of fate, of how a man may do all he can to outrun a prophecy and still run straight into its arms. It is a tragedy not born of evil, but of ignorance, of a man who sought the truth and was destroyed by it. The house of Thebes, for all its glory, was built upon the bones of serpents and riddles, and no riddle, no matter how cleverly answered, can change the will of the gods. Of all the wars that ever ravaged mortal soil, none would echo louder than the one fought for a woman's face, a war of oaths and pride, of beauty and betrayal, of gods and kings and the fall of empires. It began not with spears or fire, but with a wedding, one that all the gods were invited to, save for one. Eris, goddess of discord, was not welcome at the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, the sea nymph fated to bear a son greater than his father. In her fury, Eris cast into the feast a golden apple, inscribed with 3 words that would shatter kingdoms: to the fairest. The apple was claimed by Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each believing herself most worthy of its gleam. To settle the dispute, they turned to a mortal shepherd prince, Paris, son of King Priam of Troy, who had been exiled to the hills after an omen foretold he would one day burn the city of his birth. The gods brought him to judgment on Mount Ida, and one by one they offered bribes. Hera promised kingship over all men. Athena pledged wisdom and victory in war. But Aphrodite, with a smile like soft thunder, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love, and thus Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and Leda, wife of Menelaus, was marked. She had many suitors in her youth, princes and kings from across Achaea, drawn not only by her beauty, but by the promise of bloodlines that reached Olympus. Her mortal father, King Tyndareus, feared the war her hand would spark. On the advice of Odysseus, he bound the suitors with a sacred oath that whoever won Helen, all the others would swear to defend that union, to punish any who dared violate it. The pact was made with laughter, but oaths, once sealed, bind more than men. They bind fate. Menelaus, brother to King Agamemnon of Mycenae, won her hand. Their rule in Sparta was just, their kingdom strong. But when Paris came to visit, under the pretense of peace and guest right, he saw Helen and saw in her the prize Aphrodite had promised. Whether she went with him willingly or was taken remains a matter of song and shadow. The poets disagree, but when Paris sailed back across the Aegean, Helen was with him, and in that hour, the war began. Menelaus raged. He called upon the oath, and all who had sworn it answered: Odysseus of Ithaca, clever and reluctant; Nestor, the old sage of Pylos; Ajax the greater, son of Telamon, towering and grim; Ajax the lesser, swift and fierce; Diomedes of Argos, brave and battle-hungry; Idomeneus of Crete, stalwart and steady. From all the corners of Hellas they came, kings, princes, and warlords. Only 2 held back. Odysseus, who pretended madness, sowing salt into his fields until a clever envoy placed his infant son before the plough, and Achilles, son of Thetis, who was hidden by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, dressed in silk to escape a fate she foresaw. But the Greeks found him, Odysseus again, tricking Achilles with a spear and shield amid gifts of jewelry, and the boy chose war. They gathered at Aulis, a fleet of 1,000 ships, bronze gleaming and sails like thunderclouds. But the winds did not rise. The ships sat idle, and the men grew restless. The seer Calchas revealed that Artemis had been offended, perhaps by a boast, perhaps by a slain stag, and that only a great sacrifice would appease her. The name he spoke was Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. There are stories, of lies told to bring her to Aulis under the guise of marriage to Achilles, of her weeping mother Clytemnestra, of the moment the blade fell, or of a last-moment rescue, with Artemis spiriting the girl away and replacing her with a deer. But in most tellings the blood was real, and the gods watched as the king killed his own child for the sake of war. The winds came. The fleet sailed east, and the world changed. The Greeks set foot on Trojan shores, not as raiders, but as judgment itself. For 10 years they would camp beneath the walls of Ilium, the great city ruled by Priam, defended by his sons, Hector, noble and doomed, Paris, beautiful and weak, Deiphobus, Helenus, and the others. The gods chose sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon stood with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis favored the Trojans. Only Zeus tried to stay above it, but even he would bend, pulled by fate and family. This was not yet the war of Homer's Iliad, which would begin in the 10th year, but the war itself had already begun, not merely with spears and walls, but in the burning of oaths, in the breaking of trust, in the sacrifice of daughters and the judgment of gods. It was a war born not only of love, but of pride, of divine rivalry and mortal vanity, of old curses and deeper fears. And it would end not with victory, but with fire. By the time Homer's Iliad begins, the war at Troy has endured for 9 long years. The Greeks, those stern-faced kings who had once come roaring across the Aegean, had settled into a grim rhythm of siege and survival. What had begun in fury and fire became something colder, slower, more desperate. They built black-walled camps along the shore, hauled their ships high upon the sand, and sent out raiding parties day after day, not just to battle, but to feed their armies. The war dragged on like an old wound that would not heal, and both sides felt the infection deepening. The Trojans, safe behind their mighty walls, raised, it was said, by Poseidon himself and the mortal builder Apollo had once served in penance, suffered but endured. The fields outside the city had long been razed. Their allies came from the east and north, Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and others, bringing new life to an old cause. And yet the Greeks would not leave, not without Helen. Pride held them there as much as oaths. The war had become a matter of legacy. But war does not live in walls and ships. It lives in the hearts of men. And in this war, 2 hearts burned hotter than the rest. Agamemnon, king of kings, stern and imperial, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, unmatched in battle, fated to die young, and determined to make that death matter. The quarrel between these two would shatter the fragile Greek alliance. It began, as so many quarrels do, over a woman. In one of many raids, the Greeks had taken captives. Among them were Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Lyrnessus. Chryseis was awarded to Agamemnon, Briseis to Achilles. When Chryseis' father came to ransom her, bearing golden gifts and reverent words, Agamemnon scorned him. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god answered not with fire from the sky, but with plague, a silent killer that passed from beast to man, filling the air with death. The prophet Calchas, at last, revealed the truth. Agamemnon, forced to surrender Chryseis to save his army, did so, but in turn demanded Briseis from Achilles as compensation. It was a slight Achilles could not endure. He rose from the council in fury, called Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore an oath before the gods. He would no longer fight for the Greeks, let them bleed without him. And so he withdrew to his tent, and with him went the Myrmidons, his elite warriors, silent and dangerous, forged for war. From that moment, the tide turned. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to suffer. The Trojans pressed harder. Hector, son of Priam and champion of Troy, led the charge with a quiet, noble fury. He was not Paris, who had brought the war, nor Deiphobus, who sought glory. Hector was the heart of the city, a husband, a father, a prince who carried the burden of his people not in pride, but in duty. Day by day, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back to the sea. Ships were set ablaze. Heroes fell. Protesilaus, the first Greek to leap ashore, had died in the first skirmish. Now Patroclus, friend and companion of Achilles, watched the losses mount with growing despair. Some say Patroclus was a friend, others a lover, but all agree he was the only one who could reach Achilles in his grief and fury. When the Trojans breached the Greek defenses and threatened to burn the ships, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him fight in his stead. He wore the hero's armor, rode his chariot, led the Myrmidons into battle, and for a time, the Greeks rallied. But Patroclus, flushed with borrowed glory, went too far. He reached the gates of Troy, and there he met Hector. Their duel was brutal, and it ended with Patroclus falling beneath Hector's spear, and with him fell whatever peace remained in Achilles' heart. When Achilles learned of his death, his grief shook the camp. He did not weep like a man, he howled like a storm god, filled with rage and ruin. He returned to battle, not for glory, not for oaths, but for vengeance. His mother, Thetis, brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, bronze that gleamed like the sun, a shield carved with the history of the world. Then Achilles went to war. No one could stand against him. He slaughtered men by the dozen, chariots overturned, blood staining the dust. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they met in single combat. Hector fought bravely, but Achilles was a fire no water could quench. He struck Hector down, pierced him through, and in rage, dragged his body behind his chariot, circling the city day after day, denying the dead prince the dignity of burial. It was Priam, the old king of Troy, who brought an end to that madness. At night, guided by Hermes, he crept into the Greek camp and knelt before Achilles. He kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles finally wept. He returned Hector's body and gave Priam safe passage. For a moment, there was quiet in the war. But peace, as always, was fleeting. Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, some say fired by Paris, others guided by Apollo, struck his heel, the only vulnerable part of him. He died in the dust, young and unmatched, and the war dragged on without him. The Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with a funeral and a shared grief. Yet the war still loomed. The gods were not finished, nor were the Greeks. The wooden horse had not yet been carved. The gates had not yet opened, but the blood had been spilled, and the tide would soon turn. The war had bled the land dry. 10 years of siege had turned warriors into husks, kings into ghosts, and heroes into memories. Troy, once golden, stood behind its walls like an old lion surrounded by wolves. The sons of Priam had fallen one by one. Hector, the shield of the city, laid low by Achilles. Troilus, struck down while still a boy. Polydorus, slaughtered in betrayal. The Trojans fought with the desperation of men defending not just stone, but history. And yet they endured, year after year, while the Greeks grew weary and restless beside their smoking campfires. Then, just as the gods began to turn their gaze elsewhere, the Greeks vanished. At dawn, the Trojans climbed their towers and saw no sails upon the sea. The ships were gone. In their place, on the plain outside the Scaean gate, stood a colossal wooden horse, tall as a temple, its flanks stitched from smooth planked cedar, its mane carved in honor of Poseidon. No soldiers stirred, no weapons clashed. The war, it seemed, had ended in silence. Troy did not rejoice easily. Priam, old and cautious, questioned what he saw. Others urged caution. But it was Sinon, a cunning Greek left behind, who broke the city's fate wide open. Pretending to be a deserter, he spun a tale so clever it might have come from Odysseus's own mouth. The horse, he said, was an offering to Athena, a peace token left behind after the Greeks had sailed away. If the Trojans brought it into their city, it would guarantee their dominance for generations. But if they dared destroy it, ruin would follow. Only Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, spoke the truth. "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," he warned, and hurled a spear into the side of the horse. The wood groaned. Something shifted within. But in that moment, as if the gods themselves had tired of warning men, a pair of sea serpents, great and coiled, with eyes like burning coals, rose from the surf and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their coils. The people, seeing this, called it a sign. Troy had refused the gods' gift once before. They would not do so again. With ropes and wheels, with cheers and hymns, they brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while the city feasted and the fires died down to embers, a trapdoor in the belly of the beast opened with a groan like thunder. Out came Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and others, hand-picked for cruelty and cunning. At the same hour, the Greek fleet, hidden on the nearby isle of Tenedos, returned silently under cover of night. Troy slept. What followed was not war. It was slaughter. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, stormed through the palace like a black wind. He killed Priam at the altar of Zeus, the old king's blood soaking the stones. Cassandra, daughter of Priam and cursed prophetess, was dragged screaming from the temple of Athena, her warnings once again unheard. Hecuba, queen of Troy, watched her sons die and her city burn. The Greeks showed no mercy. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was thrown from the walls so no heir might one day rise. Temples were desecrated, women taken, and the city of Troy, once the pride of Asia, was given to flame. Helen, whose face had launched 1,000 ships, was found in the palace. Some say she wept and begged for forgiveness. Others say she stood proud, untouched by grief. Menelaus, blade in hand, looked into her eyes and dropped the sword. He took her back to Sparta, and the war, at last, claimed its final victory. When dawn rose over the plain, nothing remained but smoke and ash. The walls had fallen. The gods turned their eyes away, but the war did not end cleanly. The victors carried their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who raped Cassandra in Athena's temple, was drowned at sea. Agamemnon, returning home with Cassandra as a concubine, was murdered in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. The house of Atreus bled on. Menelaus and Helen returned to Sparta, but their names were never clean again. Diomedes, Nestor, and others wandered into obscurity or exile. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, would not see home for 10 long years. His tale, a winding odyssey of shipwreck and monsters, would become its own legend, shaped by gods and loss. Only Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, escaped Troy with his father on his back and his son by the hand. Guided by omens and stars, he carried the last ember of Troy westward, toward Italy. From his blood, so the Romans would later claim, came Romulus, Remus, and an empire even mightier than Troy. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city, it was the end of an age, the heroic age, where men dined with gods, where glory mattered more than peace, and where fate was carved into flesh and stone. The wooden horse, the fire, the betrayal, the mourning women. These were the final notes of a song that began with an apple and ended in ruin. The walls that had defied 10 years of siege fell in a single night, and the ashes of Troy drifted out to sea, borne on winds that did not care who had won. The fall of Troy was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another kind of tragedy, one not fought in open fields or high-walled cities, but on dark seas, in storm-tossed galleys, and in the crumbling halls of once proud kings. For those who survived the war, the journey home would prove far more perilous than the war itself. The gods, unappeased by the sack of Troy, turned their fury against the victors. The winds that had once carried them to war now scattered them like leaves across the face of the world. Agamemnon, the High King, returned first, or so it seemed. He sailed with Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess taken as a concubine, and brought with him spoils, stories, and the shadow of a crime. The gods had not forgotten the sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter, slain to appease Artemis before the war began. And in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, queen, mother, and widow in all but name, had not forgotten either. She had taken a lover in Agamemnon's absence. Aegisthus, a cousin with his own score to settle, descended from the cursed house of Atreus. Together they plotted murder beneath the roof Agamemnon had built. When the king returned, triumphant but weary, he walked into his palace as into a trap. Some say he was stabbed in the bath, others that Clytemnestra wrapped him in a robe and struck him down with an axe. Cassandra died too, screaming in a tongue none would hear, murdered at the threshold of a foreign land. Clytemnestra, bloodied and unrepentant, stood over her husband's body and claimed the act as justice. In that house, vengeance had become tradition. In time, vengeance came again. Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile and slew both his mother and her lover, urged on by Apollo and hounded by the Furies, ancient goddesses who punished kinslaying with madness. His was a tale of blood and absolution, one that would echo in Athenian courts and myths for generations. But his was not the only path home twisted by divine hands. Menelaus and Helen wandered long across the sea, driven southward to Egypt by contrary winds. Some versions say the Helen who went to Troy was only a phantom, and the real woman had remained in Egypt the whole time, waiting, unaged, while a war raged for her shadow. Others say she went willingly with Paris, and that Menelaus forgave her, wearied by war and longing for peace. They returned to Sparta at last, and ruled together in uneasy silence. But Helen's name, once a poem, had become a curse, and Sparta would never again rise as high as the day she left. But it was Odysseus whose journey became the most storied, the most sorrowful, the most enduring. After Troy, he sailed not for home, but into a 10-year trial by sea, caught between the wrath of Poseidon and the whims of fate. He was no innocent. Odysseus had contrived the wooden horse and led the sack of Troy, and in doing so had desecrated temples and angered gods. Poseidon, in particular, had marked him for punishment. Odysseus's ship was hurled from island to island, each more strange than the last. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops son of Poseidon, escaping with the clever name of Nobody. He dallied with Circe, the sorceress who turned his men into swine, and with Calypso, the sea nymph who kept him as a lover for 7 long years. He journeyed to the edge of the underworld, spoke with the dead, and heard the song of the sirens, tied to the mast while his crew rode with ears plugged by wax. He sailed between Scylla and Charybdis, lost all his men to storm and folly, and at last washed ashore, alone, on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his tale, gave him a ship and safe passage at last. He returned to Ithaca in rags and silence, his beard long, his eyes cold. There, in his absence, suitors had overrun his house, feasting and plotting to marry his wife Penelope, who had waited, weaving and unweaving the same shroud by candlelight. Odysseus, with the help of his son Telemachus, his loyal swineherd, and the bow only he could string, slew the suitors one by one. Blood filled the great hall. Peace returned, but only for a time. The cycle of war and vengeance was never far behind. Many others fared worse. Ajax the Lesser was struck down by Athena for his crimes. Diomedes, though valiant in war, returned to find his wife unfaithful, and his city turned against him. He wandered west, founding cities, fading into legend. Philoctetes, who had slain Paris with Heracles' bow, found no welcome home and became a wanderer. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, was killed in Delphi, cut down at Apollo's altar, perhaps in penance for the blood he spilled at Troy. The Trojan War had promised glory. It had delivered only ashes. The heroes who had once stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the walls of Ilium returned to broken homes, bitter wives, hostile gods, and the hollow echo of songs that no longer matched the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. Before the walls of Troy ever stood, before heroes raised shields or ships touched the wine-dark sea, there was a deeper current of power, older than man, older even than war, the rule of the gods. Their stories are often whispered beneath the tales of mortals, but it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of fate. And it was not always they who ruled. Before Olympus, there was chaos, and after chaos came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the slow, violent birth of divine order. The age of the Titans had ended with fire and thunder. Zeus, youngest of Cronus's children, had risen against his father, freed his siblings from the belly of the sky god, and cast the Titans into the black pit of Tartarus. In their place rose the Olympians, 12 in number, though their names and thrones shifted with time. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes. Upon Mount Olympus, they built a new order, not kinder than the one before, but shrewder, more complex, and far more entangled with the fates of mortals. Zeus ruled from his golden throne, the thunderbolt always within reach, his voice law among gods and men. But his rule was not born solely from strength. He was a king who understood alliances, who rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal. He divided the world among his brothers, the sky for himself, the sea to Poseidon, and the underworld to Hades. Earth and Olympus they shared in uneasy balance. Around him, the new pantheon took shape. Hera, his sister and queen, reigned as goddess of marriage and childbirth, though her days were spent in fury and suspicion, for Zeus was never faithful. His liaisons were countless, with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women alike, each union producing children who would rattle the world: Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos, and many more. Hera, ever watchful, punished his lovers and their offspring with wrath both cold and enduring. Beside them stood Athena, born not from a womb, but from Zeus's own skull, fully formed and armored, the goddess of wisdom and warcraft. She favored mortals who used cleverness over brute force, Odysseus above all, and guided cities like Athens to flourish under law and reason. Unlike Ares, who delighted in slaughter, Athena's warfare was disciplined and precise. Her presence marked the Olympian era as one of intellect as much as strength. Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Leto, brought light and shadow in equal measure. Apollo, golden-haired and radiant, ruled over prophecy, music, and healing. He claimed the oracle at Delphi, speaking in riddles through the Pythia, shaping kings and battles with a few cryptic words. Yet he could also bring plague, as he did upon the Achaeans at Troy. Artemis, his sister, roamed the forests untouched by men, a huntress and protector of wild things. She asked no permission and gave no forgiveness to those who trespassed her sacred groves. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, kept the earth fertile, except when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades. In her grief, Demeter let the crops wither, and from her sorrow, the seasons were born. Her myth echoed through every field, every cold winter and warm spring, a cycle of mourning and return. Aphrodite, said by some to have risen from the sea foam where Uranus's severed flesh fell, ruled love and desire. Her beauty stirred both gods and mortals to madness. She bound men's hearts to ruin and pleasure alike. In the halls of Olympus, she was married to Hephaestus, the lame smith god, but gave her heart and body to Ares, the god of war. Together they embodied the chaos of passion and conflict. Hermes, Quicksilver son of Zeus, moved between worlds as messenger, thief, and guide of souls. He was the god of boundaries, both keeper and breaker of them. No door was closed to Hermes. He walked freely from Olympus to Hades, from feast to battlefield, a smile always playing on his lips. This new pantheon did not rule in silence. The Olympians were not distant creators. They were immanent, meddling, playing favorites, waging subtle wars through the hands of mortals. Unlike the Titans, who embodied elemental force, the Olympians were reflections of human nature elevated to divine scale. Their loves were messy, their grudges eternal, their pride vast. They helped and hindered as whim dictated. Cities were founded in their honor. Sacrifices were burned for their favor. Oracles spoke their will, and every home kept a flame for Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who asked for little and gave peace in return. Yet beneath all their grandeur lay a constant truth. Their power, though vast, was not absolute. They could be bound by oaths, tricked by mortals, and undone by time. Even Zeus, in his glory, was haunted by the same fear that doomed his father, that one day a child of his would rise to overthrow him. His union with Thetis was abandoned for this reason. She was wed instead to a mortal, Peleus, so that Achilles, her son, would die young and not ascend. In this, the Olympians were no different from men. They feared loss, clung to thrones, and fought to keep their order intact. But for a time, they ruled, their names etched into every marble temple, their deeds sung in every song, their symbols carved into shields and coins. The age of heroes had passed, but the gods still held dominion over the world of men. And yet, from distant lands and whispered prophecies, came the faintest echo of change. New gods stirred beyond the horizon. The temples would not stay full forever. But Olympus, for now, still stood. The Olympians were mighty, but they were not unchallenged. Even as temples to Zeus reached toward the sky and Athena's wisdom lit the minds of city-states, darker gods walked the earth, gods of wine and madness, of death and rebirth, of things not carved into public altars but whispered in secret groves and torchlit caves. Chief among them was Dionysus, the last to take his seat on Olympus, and the only one who truly stood between the divine and the wild. Dionysus was no ordinary god. His birth alone defied the laws of nature and propriety. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. When Semele, tricked by Hera, demanded Zeus reveal his true divine form, she was consumed by his thunderous radiance. Yet from her ashes, Zeus plucked the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again. Twice born, they would call him. And from the moment of his second birth, his path was unlike any other Olympian's. He was raised not on Olympus, but in far corners of the world, among nymphs in Nysa, in the caves of India, in the company of satyrs and maenads. He wandered, not ruling from a throne, but roaming with flute and vine, his train of revelers trailing behind in ecstatic dance. Where he walked, vineyards bloomed and reason faltered. He was not merely the god of wine, but of alteration, of the thin, sacred line between civilization and chaos, between ecstasy and insanity. He inspired joy, yes, but also frenzy, and in frenzy, men and women alike might forget who they were. His arrival in Greece was not without resistance. Cities mocked his rites, kings barred his worship. One by one, he punished them. In Thebes, his mother's homeland, the young god returned disguised, his followers stirring unrest with drums and cries. Pentheus, the rigid king, tried to suppress the madness. He arrested Dionysus, scoffed at the wild rites, and sought to spy on the women of the hills. But the god lured him into the woods dressed as a woman, and there, in a trance of divine madness, his own mother, Agave, led the Maenads in tearing him limb from limb. Only when she returned to the city with her son's head on a thyrsus did the spell break, and the lesson settle like a shadow over all Thebes. Dionysus was the god of theatre as well as intoxication, of masks and performance, of truths hidden within lies. His festivals became the heart of Greek drama, where comedies and tragedies alike were performed in his honor. Through masks and songs, the Greeks gave shape to fears and desires they dared not speak aloud. To worship Dionysus was not to bow before power, but to surrender to it completely. And with Dionysus came something new to the Greek world: mystery cults, religions of initiation, secrecy, and rebirth. Unlike the formal rites of Olympus, mystery cults promised something personal. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Demeter and Persephone reenacted the story of descent and return, of a daughter lost to death and found again. The Orphics, followers of the poet-mystic Orpheus, spoke of Dionysus as a god torn apart and resurrected, a god whose suffering brought wisdom and whose rites promised freedom from the cycle of rebirth. These mysteries did not reject the Olympians, but they moved beneath them, quieter and deeper. They offered hope where the thundering gods gave only law. They whispered of a soul that could endure, that could transcend the mortal body. And in that promise, the old certainties began to tremble. Even on Olympus, the cracks began to show. The gods feuded more bitterly. Ares and Athena vied for the hearts of warriors. Apollo fell in love too often and too fatally. Hyacinthus, Daphne, Coronis, leaving death and transformation in his wake. Aphrodite, jealous and capricious, punished mortals for the very desire she stirred. The gods began to resemble the mortals they ruled, proud, fickle, wounded, and lost. In Dionysus, the Olympian order met its mirror and its undoing. He was divine, and yet lived as a wanderer. He brought joy, yet left madness. He tore down kings and raised up peasants. And most importantly, he changed the nature of divinity itself. The gods were no longer aloof and eternal. Through mystery, through ritual, through wine and song and madness, mortals could feel the breath of God within them, not in temples, but in themselves. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the wine-dark seas and the marble columns, new gods stirred. Rome was rising, the world was changing, and Olympus, for all its thrones and thunders, could already feel the wind shifting on the mountaintop. The Olympians, for all their immortality and glory, did not confine their stories to the high halls of Olympus. They descended again and again into the world of men. In the form of lovers, tempters, warriors, or punishers, they mingled with mortals and left behind not just oracles or omens, but children. These children of gods and mortals, demigods, were born into a world that neither fully embraced them nor could ever fully contain them. Some became kings, others monsters, but a few became legends, their stories lasting longer than the walls of Troy or even the temples of the gods who sired them. Foremost among these was Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal queen of Thebes. His conception was marked by trickery. Zeus came to Alcmene in the form of her husband, drawing out the night so that it lasted twice as long. From that deception, Heracles was born, already shadowed by Hera's wrath. For Hera, the queen of heaven, could never abide her husband's infidelities, and she made the life of Heracles a crucible of torment. While still in his cradle, she sent serpents to kill him, and the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength, but it was not brute force that defined his legend. It was penance. In a fit of divinely sent madness, Hera's vengeance again, he killed his wife and children. Racked by grief, he sought purification at the Oracle of Delphi. There, he was told to serve Eurystheus, a petty king, and complete 12 labors, each more impossible than the last. He wrestled the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce. He slew the Lernaean hydra, cauterizing each writhing neck. He captured the Erymanthian boar, cleansed the stables of Algaeus in a single day, drove away the Stymphalian birds, and tamed the Cretan bull. He stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, seized the cattle of Geryon, fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides, and descended into Hades to bring back the hound Cerberus. Each trial was more than a feat of strength. They were encounters with death, with the edge of the world, with the very fabric of human suffering. Through them, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a symbol of mortal endurance, of pain redeemed through effort. At his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a centaur, he built his own funeral pyre and climbed atop it, mortal no longer. The gods took him to Olympus, where even Hera, at last, accepted him as divine. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Yet Heracles was not the first demigod, nor the only one whose story shaped the fate of mortals. Long before him came Perseus, another son of Zeus, born of Danae, who was imprisoned in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that her child would kill her father. But fate, once set in motion, cannot be locked away. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold, and from that union, Perseus was born. Abandoned at sea in a chest, mother and child survived and were taken in by a kind fisherman. But again, a king's lust, this time Polydectes, who desired Danae, set Perseus on a path of peril. Ordered to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, Perseus embarked on his quest armed by the gods. Hermes gave him a sword, Athena a polished shield. He stole the eye of the Grey, the old Grey sisters who shared one vision among them, and learned the Gorgon's location. With Athena's guidance, he approached as Medusa slept, using the mirror of his shield to strike without looking, and severed her head. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior of gold. Perseus escaped with their help, and on his return journey rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and founded dynasties. His lineage would carry on to Heracles, linking their stories by blood and fate. There were others: Theseus, son of Poseidon, or Aegeus depending on the telling, who slew the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, bringing Athens into its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, who killed the Chimera but flew too high and fell. Atalanta, raised by bears and swift as the wind, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis herself, who raced suitors and killed boars, but was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never allowed peace. Their blood was too divine for comfort, too mortal for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth, and the mortals worshipped them, not just for their triumphs, but for their struggles. They suffered, bled, and sometimes died. But in doing so, they became immortal in a way the gods never could, through story. As the memory of Troy faded, as cities rose and fell, the tales of these children endured. They filled amphorae and temple friezes, echoed in poems and plays. And though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and growing more silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its mirrors, flawed, courageous, doomed, and glorious. In the world of Greek myth, power did not rest solely in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something older still, something deeper, humming beneath every choice and every death, every victory and every sorrow. Fate. It was not a god, though the gods themselves feared it. It was not a law, though it governed even the divine. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen but inescapable, woven into the bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes she had faces, the Moirai, or Fates, three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut it when the time came. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, was bound by their decisions. He might thunder and plead, but if Atropos raised her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. And so, if fate ruled all, what hope had man? The answer lay in omens and oracles, the strange subtle language of the gods and the signs sent to those who dared to read them. The Greeks did not believe they could change their fates, but they believed they might understand them. To see the future was to brace oneself against it, to try, perhaps vainly, to prepare the soul. The most famous oracle in all of Greece was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod over a steaming chasm in the temple's stone floor. She inhaled vapors, slipped into trance, and delivered the words of the god in riddles and fragments. Kings, generals, and common men came to her, some to seek glory, others merely survival. But her words were never straightforward. Apollo did not deal in certainties. A prophecy, like a blade, could cut both ways. So many stories twisted around her cryptic pronouncements. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked the oracle if he should wage war on the Persians. She told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He did not realize the empire would be his own. Oedipus, too, was told he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him. He, in turn, fled his supposed home to avoid fulfilling it, only to walk straight into its jaws. The oracle, as always, had been correct. It was men's misinterpretation that doomed them. There were other oracles too, at Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oaks revealed the will of Zeus, at Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis, at Ammon in Libya, and countless smaller shrines where dreams, animal entrails, birds in flight, or the trembling of a flame gave voice to the unknowable. In war, omens were sought before every battle. A flash of lightning, a flight of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. These were not trifles. They were warnings, communications from the divine. A general who ignored them risked not only defeat, but cosmic punishment. Sacrifices were made before sea voyages, births, weddings. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were studied by seers, who divined the will of the gods in dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of reading omens became its own power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, held influence equal to kings. Tiresias in particular, touched by both male and female life, was said to have lived 7 generations, his wisdom unrivaled, his visions sometimes a curse to those who asked for them. But oracles and omens were not mere superstitions. They represented something deeper, the Greek understanding that mortals were not in control. No matter how mighty the hero, how noble the bloodline, how loyal the heart, the wheel of fate turned ever on. And in that turning, all must one day be broken. The gift of prophecy was not power, it was awareness. And awareness, too late, was often indistinguishable from tragedy. Still, men sought prophecy. They climbed mountain paths to Delphi, brought gold and goat blood, asked questions in trembling voices. For even if fate could not be changed, it could be faced. To know the storm was coming was not to stop it, but it was, perhaps, to die with eyes open. In this tension, between knowledge and helplessness, between the known and the feared, the Greeks found meaning. Their stories were not about victory over destiny, but dignity within it. Even the gods watched the loom of the fates, unable to sever the threads they disliked. Hector knew he would die, and still strapped on his armor. Achilles knew he would not return, and still sailed to Troy. Oedipus sought to flee his doom, and instead ran headlong into it. And the Pythia kept breathing, year after year, whispering riddles in the smoke, her voice the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was to come. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of story, but merely the end of breath. What followed was not heaven or hell in the Christian sense, but a realm both more neutral and more ancient, a land beneath the earth where all the dead, great and small, noble and villainous, made their final journey. This place was Hades, named for the god who ruled it, and though it bore no flames, no pitchforks, no horned demons, it inspired a dread so deep that mortals seldom spoke the god's name aloud. They called him instead Pluton, the wealthy one, for all riches, all veins of silver and gold, came from beneath the earth, and so too did the dead. The geography of the underworld was shaped not by logic, but by myth and memory. At its threshold ran the 5 rivers: Styx, the river of hatred and sacred oaths; Acheron, the river of sorrow; Phlegethon, of fire; Cocytus, of lamentation; and Lethe, of forgetfulness. Each marked a boundary not only physical but spiritual. The dead arrived as shadows, Suchai, breathless and bloodless, stripped of voice and form, and crossed into Hades with the help of Charon, the ferryman. For a coin, he would row them across Acheron. Those without proper burial, those who could not pay, were left to wander the shores for 100 years, whispering and weeping. Upon entry, the souls were met by Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who kept the dead in and the living out. Beyond him stretched the plains of Asphodel, grey and dim, where most souls drifted in forgetful silence, murmuring like dry leaves. But not all fates were equal. The underworld had its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iarchus, who weighed each soul. The truly wicked were cast into Tartarus, a chasm of torment deeper than even the Titan's prison, where oath-breakers, murderers, and traitors suffered torments crafted to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus rolled his stone, Tantalus thirsted forever beside unreachable water, and Ixion spun upon his fiery wheel. The rare few deemed worthy of reward passed to the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft winds, green meadows, and perpetual spring. There, heroes might linger in comfort, their memories intact, their deeds honored. Still fewer souls might choose to be reborn, passing through the river Lethe to forget their past lives, beginning the cycle anew. In later mystery religions, a soul might even hope to escape the wheel entirely and ascend to the stars, but such fates were rare and uncertain. At the heart of this realm stood Hades, stern and silent, a king without vanity. He did not seek worship, did not interfere in the affairs of mortals. He simply ruled, and he ruled absolutely. His realm did not change, and he preferred it that way. He was not evil, as later myths would paint him, but immovable, indifferent, the shadow cast by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's tide. And by his side stood Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose story, perhaps more than any other, reveals the strange duality of death in Greek thought. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. One spring day, as she gathered flowers, the earth split open, and Hades rose in his chariot. He took her, swiftly and without consent, down into his realm. Demeter, in her grief, let the earth wither, Crops failed, rivers dried, famine swept across the land. No prayer could sway her. She would not let the world grow green again until her daughter was returned. At last, Zeus sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone. But because she had eaten pomegranate seeds, 6 of them, or perhaps just 1, she was bound to Hades. The compromise became a myth for the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and during those months, Demeter would grieve and the world would grow cold. When Persephone returned, the earth would bloom. Life and death became a cycle, not a sentence. Over time, Persephone's role evolved. No longer merely a captive, she became a ruler in her own right. A queen of mysteries who walked among the shades with quiet authority. In the Eleusinian mysteries, the great secret rites held outside Athens, her descent and return were reenacted each year, promising not only the return of the grain, but the hope of renewal for the soul. The underworld was not entirely sealed. A few mortals journeyed there and lived to tell of it. Orpheus sang his way past Cerberus and charmed Hades and Persephone, only to lose Eurydice with a backward glance. Heracles brought Cerberus to the surface. Odysseus, guided by Circe, sacrificed to the dead and called up the ghosts of Tiresias, Achilles, Agamemnon. Each one told him that death was not glorious, only final. Better to be a slave in life than a king among shades, said Achilles, once the greatest of the Greeks. And so the Greeks built their tombs with care. They buried the dead with coins for Charon, with weapons, wine, and songs. They poured libations and made offerings at the family hearth, for the dead were never truly gone. They haunted dreams, sent signs, and sometimes, through rites and blood, could even be called back for answers best left unspoken. The underworld was a mirror of life, of memory, of justice without appeal. It offered no heaven for the faithful, nor hell for the faithless. It simply existed, vast and dark, ruled by a god who did not seek love or prayers, only silence. In that stillness, the Greeks saw the shape of eternity. And in the stories they told of Hades and Persephone, of shadows and judgment, of rivers and thrones beneath the earth, they gave death its place in the order of the cosmos, not as a punishment, but as a passage. Even the gods are not immortal, not in memory, not in power, and not in reverence. There comes a moment in every mythic cycle where the divine grows quiet, where once vivid figures fade from the edges of men's dreams, and thrones once built in thunder are worn smooth by time. For the gods of Olympus, that slow retreat began not with war or prophecy, but with Rome, and with a world that had grown restless under the weight of old stories. The Romans did not destroy the Greek gods. They adopted them, gave them new names, folded their myths into Roman values and Roman conquest. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, and so on. An act of transformation, as calculated as it was reverent. Rome admired the grandeur of Olympus, but it reshaped the gods to better reflect its ideals: order, hierarchy, empire. Jupiter thundered not from a wild peak, but from the Capitoline hill, dressed in the robes of a lawgiver. The wildness of Dionysus became the cultured Bacchus, and Athena's fierce independence softened in the civic wisdom of Minerva. In literature, the myths lived on. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold the old tales in golden Latin, often with irony, always with poetic grace. Virgil, in the Aeneid, made the gods instruments of fate, pulling strings behind Rome's founding. but something had shifted. In Homer, the gods strode the battlefield, naked in their passions, visible in the dust and blood. In Roman myth, they had become symbolic, distant, politicized. They no longer intervened as freely. They had become themes more than presences. And as the empire expanded, so too did its encounters with new gods and ideas. From the east came Mithras, a deity born from stone, slayer of cosmic bulls. From Egypt came Isis, mother of magic and life, wrapped in silks and secrets. From Judea came a single, invisible god, one who forbade images, scorned idols, and made no room for divine siblings or thunder-wielding kings. These new cults did not simply compete with the Olympians. They undermined the entire architecture of Greek belief. Where the old gods ruled by appetite and hierarchy, these new faiths offered moral clarity, unity, and salvation. At the same time, philosophy began to erode the mythic world from within. Thinkers like Xenophanes had long mocked the idea of gods shaped in the image of men, arguing that if oxen had gods, they too would look bovine. Plato admired the beauty of myth, but cast doubt on its literal truth, suggesting the gods must be perfect and good, not the jealous, lustful figures who bickered on Olympus. Epicurus declared that the gods existed but took no interest in human affairs, and that fear of divine punishment was a superstition to be cast off. Even Stoicism, with its stern ethical code, saw divinity not in figures, but in reason itself, the logos that governed all. By the time the imperial cult arose, when emperors were declared divine and altars were built to mortal men, the line between myth and politics had frayed entirely. The gods of old became symbols, their temples kept more for tradition than belief. Farmers still left offerings to Demeter, and sailors still prayed to Poseidon, but fewer truly believed the gods walked among them. The flame on Olympus had not yet gone out, but it flickered low. And then came the final blow, not from a rival cult, but from a revolution of faith. Christianity, once a fringe sect of persecuted believers, began to spread across the empire, carried not by sword, but by word. Its God was unseen, singular, and omnipotent. Its stories were not of lovers and vengeance, but of sin and salvation. In time, its temples replaced the old ones. Its hymns drowned out the liars. Its priests denounced the Olympians as demons or fictions. By the reign of Theodosius I, pagan temples were closed by law, the Olympic Games abolished, and the rites of sacrifice outlawed. The gods did not resist. There was no final war between Zeus and Christ, no divine siege of Jerusalem or Rome. The Olympians simply faded, like the last light of a long day. Their statues stood weathered and silent. Their altars went cold. The marble columns cracked, and ivy crept up where priests once stood. The myths remained, but as literature, not faith. Children learned of Heracles in schools, not shrines. Artists painted Athena, but did not pray to her. The gods who had once commanded storms and fates were now stories, beautiful, strange, haunting. And yet, they endured. Even as their temples crumbled, they lived on in whispers, in poetry, in the architecture of Western imagination. They returned in Renaissance paintings, in Enlightenment philosophy, in romantic epics and modern retellings. They became archetypes of war and wisdom, of love and betrayal, of hubris and glory. The Greeks had given them human faces, and in doing so had made them eternal in a different way. Though the temples fell and the oracles fell silent, the myths of Olympus did not die. They became echoes, faint at first, like a distant lyre strummed in the wind, then louder as time passed, and the world once again began to listen. For myths, unlike kingdoms, are not bound by stone and sword. They endure in the realm of imagination, and there the gods have always found a way to return. During the long centuries of Christian dominance in Europe, the gods were not worshipped, but neither were they forgotten. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts, sometimes grudgingly, preserving Homer and Hesiod, Euripides and Sophocles, even as they condemned the beliefs these works once sustained. The old stories survived not in temples but in libraries, tucked between sermons and treatises, waiting. And then came the Renaissance, that great turning of the wheel, when Europe looked backward to move forward. In the courts of Florence, in the chapels of Rome, in the minds of thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus, the gods rose again, not as deities, but as symbols of human nature. Painters draped Aphrodite in seashells and light. Sculptors gave Apollo his bow and grace. Poets invoked the muse once more. Myth was reborn in marble and canvas, not altar and incense. The gods no longer ruled the sky, but they reigned in art. In the Age of Enlightenment, reason challenged superstition, and yet the myths endured. They were studied, translated, dissected. To Voltaire, they were allegories. To Goethe, they were mirrors of the soul. Romanticism followed, and with it, a return to the emotional, the tragic, the sublime. Writers looked to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice, and found in them eternal questions. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to be human? Then came the modern age. Myth was no longer confined to classical study. It appeared in literature, cinema, psychology, even comics. Carl Jung saw the gods as archetypes within the human mind, eternally re-emerging. James Joyce wove them into Dublin's streets. Rick Riordan reimagined them for schoolchildren in Manhattan. In Marvel and DC, the gods walked again, not in robes and sandals, but in armor and spandex. And always, in the background, there remained the old tales, unchanged. Odysseus still sailed. Heracles still labored. Persephone still rose each spring. They were not forgotten. They were simply translated, generation to generation, into new forms, new tongues, new dreams. Because myth is not fixed. It is living memory, shaped by those who carry it. What the Greeks gave us was not just a pantheon, but a framework, a way to explain the world, to wrestle with death, to honor beauty, to understand the self. Their gods were flawed, yes, but gloriously so. In them we saw not perfection, but potential, the agony of choice, the thrill of risk, the pain of hubris, the comfort of ritual. They told us what we might become and what we must fear. Even now, in a world of science and silence, the myths still murmur. You hear them in stories of chosen heroes, in fallen stars, in the slow turn of the seasons. A girl descends and spring waits. A king defies prophecy and loses everything. A mother grieves the son. The faces change, but the truths do not. The gods may have left Olympus, but they never truly left us. They walk quietly now, in books and songs, in dreams and memories, in every tale that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil. They are not dead. They have simply moved. And now the story ends. The winds on Mount Olympus are cold. The torches in Delphi are ash, but the myths remain. Good night.